The super empath who makes the avoidant lose control. You've been told you feel too much. You've been told you care too deeply. You've been told that loving the way you do will only end in heartbreak, especially when the person you love keeps pulling away, shutting down, or running. But what if I told you that your sensitivity, your empathy, your ability to see people, really see them, isn't a weakness? What if I told you that it's your greatest power? You see, an avoidant person, someone emotionally unavailable, lives behind walls, not because they want to hurt you, but because they're terrified of what it means to be truly seen, loved, chosen, exposed. Most people walk into an avoidance life and either chase them endlessly or play mind games to win them over. But not you. You, the super empath, don't chase. You observe, you understand, you reflect, and then you choose. You don't try to force connection. You invite it. That's what makes you different, and it drives the avoidant wild, not because you're manipulating them, but because you finally represent a relationship that is safe and strong. You don't guilt trip them into opening up. You don't beg for scraps of affection. You hold space. You mirror back their behavior without hostility, and that calm presence, that quiet confidence makes their defenses start to shake. They're not used to being met with this kind of energy. Composed, compassionate, but completely unwilling to self-abandon. That's when they start to lose control, not in fear, but in curiosity. They start to ask, why doesn't this person chase me? Why do I feel safe here, even though I'm terrified? Who is this person who sees through me and still stands strong? And that's when the shift happens. You stop being the one who's vulnerable to rejection, and they become the one who's afraid to lose you. Being deeply empathetic in a world that often rewards detachment can feel like walking around with your heart exposed. You pick up on subtle shifts in tone, body language, and energy. You notice when someone is withdrawing long before they say a word. You care, genuinely, intensely, and with a sense of loyalty that runs deep. And because of that, you've probably been made to feel like something's wrong with you, that you're too much, too sensitive, too emotional. But what the world doesn't always understand is that this level of empathy isn't a flaw. It's a form of emotional intelligence most people haven't even begun to cultivate. An empath has the ability to see beneath the surface. While others react to what someone says, you react to what they mean. While others get caught up in arguments, you're noticing the pain behind the defensiveness. This ability allows you to understand people far beyond their words. And when you bring this kind of emotional awareness into a relationship, especially with someone avoidant, it changes everything. Because avoidant people are used to interactions that feel reactive. They expect criticism, chasing, or silence. But you offer reflection. You respond, not react. That unsettles them in the best way. Your empathy makes you a mirror. It shows people who they are. Sometimes that's exactly what they need, even when they resist it. But here's what makes your empathy powerful. It doesn't mean you're passive. You don't get swept away by someone else's emotions. You can feel them deeply without taking them on. Passion is both a vice and an asset, and the power that goes with it. There is a known seed mirror. It shows people who they are. Sometimes that's exactly what they need, even when they resist it. But here's what makes your empathy powerful. It doesn't cause anyone to either. That's the difference between an empath who suffers and a super empath who leads. You don't lose yourself in someone else's chaos. You can stand with compassion and boundaries. And that balance is what gives you an edge. Because you can make someone feel seen without letting them walk over you. You can say, I understand why you're pulling away, and I'm not here to fix that for you. It's silly, but there are some powerful, that one sentence alone, grounded in empathy, but rooted in self-worth, is enough to stop someone in their tracks. It shows a level of emotional maturity that most avoidants have never encountered. They're used to people either trying to save them or giving up entirely. But your ability to stay present without losing your power makes them question everything they thought they knew about relationships. That's not weakness, that's mastery. Emotionally avoidant people often confuse and frustrate those who care about them. One day they're warm and connected, and the next they've gone cold, distant, or disappeared altogether. It's easy to take this personally. When someone pulls away, especially after moments of closeness, it can feel like rejection. It can feel like you did something wrong. But the truth is, their avoidance isn't about you. It's about their fear of vulnerability. Avoidant individuals often carry emotional wounds that taught them intimacy is unsafe. Maybe they grew up in environments where emotional needs weren't met, or they were punished for expressing feelings. Somewhere along the line, they learned that closeness equals danger. So even when they crave connection, they associate it with loss of control, pain, or being overwhelmed. Their instinct isn't to move closer, it's to retreat, to self-protect, to preserve the illusion of independence. This fear doesn't disappear just because they meet someone kind, understanding, or emotionally available. In fact, being seen by someone as deeply attuned as an empath can intensify the fear. Suddenly, they're not just in a relationship, they're exposed. They can't hide behind charm or silence because you sense what's really going on. You notice the hesitation in their eyes, the tension in their voice, the cracks in their emotional armor. And that level of exposure can be terrifying to someone who's never felt safe being fully known. So they pull back, not because you're wrong for them, but because you're different. You're not feeding their avoidance patterns. You're not playing games. You're showing up consistently, honestly, and emotionally present. That's unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar can feel threatening to someone who only knows survival, not connection. It's important to understand that their pulling away isn't a judgment on your worth. It's a reflection of their inner battle between wanting closeness and fearing it. What throws avoidant people off is when they meet someone who doesn't react with panic or pressure, someone who doesn't chase or try to fix them, someone who understands their fear without enabling it. That calm, grounded presence invites them to stay, but it doesn't beg. That's when their defenses start to soften, because they're not being forced to open up, they're being shown that it's safe to. That's a kind of power empathy holds, the ability to create space where even the emotionally unavailable begin to reconsider what connection might feel like. The super empath operates from a place of emotional sovereignty. While others may spiral into anxiety, over-explaining, or chasing after someone who withdraws, the super empath remains centered. When an avoidant partner pulls away, the average response is fear-driven, calling, texting, trying to reconnect through effort or emotional persuasion. But the super empath doesn't reach for control. They don't beg for reassurance. They don't attempt to overcompensate for the other person's discomfort. Instead, they observe the shift, recognize the pattern, and allow space without collapsing into self-doubt. This doesn't come from apathy or pride, it comes from emotional mastery. The super empath knows that chasing someone who's retreating never creates connection. It only reinforces their fear of enmeshment. So instead of chasing, they respond with emotional stillness. They don't punish, they don't engage in emotional manipulation or passive aggression. They simply remain present in their own energy. That quiet strength sends a message far louder than words. I don't need to abandon myself to keep you. Avoidant individuals are used to triggering panic in their partners. They subconsciously test limits to see if closeness will result in suffocation, demands, or guilt. But when they meet a super empath, the cycle breaks. There is no emotional explosion, no dramatic breakdown, just clarity and boundaries. He said, I find that some people make you lie to get into bed, and that unexpected response creates a disruption in the avoidant's internal narrative. It makes them wonder, why didn't this person try to pull me back? Why do I still feel their presence, even when they're not pushing for connection? It's not that the super empath doesn't feel. They feel deeply. But they've trained themselves to respond, not react. They know that someone else's emotional withdrawal doesn't require them to abandon their dignity. They don't chase because they know real connection can't be forced. And they don't shut down either because their empathy doesn't vanish. It just stops leaking out in desperation. This balanced approach often brings the avoidant into unfamiliar emotional territory. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they feel curious. Instead of bracing for emotional demands, they begin to lean in, trying to understand the person who isn't rattled by their usual distancing tactics. The super empath holds up a mirror, not one of judgment, but of self-possession. They're saying, I care about you, but I care about me too. That simple truth carries weight. It's not a performance. It's a reflection of real inner strength. And it's what makes the super empath so profoundly magnetic in the eyes of someone who's never known love without pressure. When you're a super empath, your presence alone can feel like a soft but powerful current. Heart. You don't demand change. You don't push or pressure, but your way of seeing someone, really seeing them, naturally stirs something deeper inside. For the avoidant person who's used to staying hidden behind emotional walls, that presence is disarming. They're not met with drama or chaos. They're met with calm awareness. You become a mirror, not a storm. And in that mirror, they're faced with themselves in ways they've never had to confront before. Most people either react to avoidance with frustration or retreat into silence. That reinforces the avoidance story that relationships are either suffocating or unsafe. But you bring something else entirely. You hold space. You recognize their fear for what it is, not rejection of you, but resistance to their own vulnerability. You offer connection without control, intimacy without intrusion, and that steadiness shakes something loose in them. Your empathy makes them feel safe, not judged. And for someone who's spent their life trying to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm, that safety is unfamiliar, but magnetic. You don't try to fix them, but your emotional clarity quietly challenges them to rise. They begin to feel exposed, not in a threatening way, but in a healing one. It's as if you can see through their defenses, yet you choose not to exploit them. That choice alone builds a trust they didn't know they were searching for. You don't trigger fear, you trigger curiosity. That's where the shift begins. Suddenly, they're not thinking about how to escape the moment. They're wondering why they feel drawn in, even though they're afraid. They start to realize they can breathe around you. That their emotions, once buried and guarded, are starting to surface naturally in your presence. And even more importantly, you don't flinch when they do. You hold your ground. You show that you're strong enough to hold space for both your feelings and theirs without losing yourself. This is what begins to unravel the avoidance emotional armor. They feel safe not because you're making them promises or tiptoeing around their wounds, but because you're simply being real, with empathy and strength in equal measure. They begin to understand that emotional connection doesn't have to mean loss of self, and they start to see that maybe, just maybe, being seen isn't the threat they thought it was. It might actually be the beginning of freedom. Most people think that power in a relationship comes from being less invested, from playing hard to get, from controlling the pace of connection. But real power, lasting, grounded, undeniable power, comes from emotional mastery. It comes from knowing yourself so well that someone else's behavior doesn't dictate your self-worth or emotional state. That's what sets the super empath apart. They don't need to manipulate, chase, or retreat. They stay centered, and that changes the entire dynamic. When an avoidant person begins a relationship, they usually hold the emotional upper hand. They set the tone, decide the pace, and keep things at arm's length. They're used to others bending to their rhythm, becoming anxious, overly available, or emotionally volatile. But the super empath doesn't play that game. They recognize the signs of avoidance early and don't react with panic. They observe, they feel, but they choose their response from a place of clarity, not need. That inner stillness is deeply unsettling to someone who's used to being in control. Avoidants often maintain distance because it gives them a sense of safety. But when they see that their distancing doesn't provoke chaos in the super empath, it starts to destabilize the narrative they've built around love. Suddenly, they're the ones feeling off balance. They're the ones wondering, why doesn't this person chase me? Why do I feel their presence even when they're not trying to get my attention? This is where the tables quietly turn. Emotional mastery, especially in the hands of an empath, becomes magnetic. It pulls the avoidant toward connection, not because they're being manipulated, but because they feel safe in the presence of someone who can handle emotional complexity without trying to control it. The super empath becomes the emotional anchor, stable, grounded, and deeply intuitive. And that's when the avoidance starts to shift. The very person who once feared closeness now begins to fear losing the person who offers it without pressure. They sense that the super empath has options, boundaries, and emotional strength. And that kind of energy doesn't cling, it chooses. So when the avoidant starts to realize that connection with this person is not guaranteed, that it must be earned, nurtured, and respected, they begin to lose control of the dynamic they once managed so effortlessly. What once felt like a one-sided dance of pursuit and retreat becomes a space where they must show up fully or risk losing something they can no longer ignore. So if you've ever doubted your sensitivity, if you've ever been told you love too deeply, feel too much, or care too hard, let this be your reminder. Your empathy is not your liability. It is your superpower. You're not here to chase people into healing. You're here to reflect, to invite, and to lead by the way you hold yourself. The avoidant may run from many things, closeness, vulnerability, even love itself. But what they can't outrun is the quiet strength of someone who stands fully in their own truth. Someone who loves without losing themselves. Someone who sees through the fear without becoming part of it. You don't have to fight for connection. You don't have to perform to be loved. When you master your emotions and show up with empathy, strength, and boundaries, you become the one who chooses, not the one who waits to be chosen. Because in the end, real power isn't loud. It doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It radiates. And that's what makes you unforgettable. Thank you for giving your time, your presence, and your heart to this message today. If it resonated, it's because something inside you already knows your power. You just needed the reminder. Take this with you. Your ability to love with depth and clarity is rare. Protect it, stand in it, and know that when you stay rooted in who you are, the right people won't just recognize it, they'll rise to meet it. Until next time, stay kind, stay grounded, and never apologize for the strength of your heart. Thank you.